Coming up on this episode of Tom Talks Rubbish.
Being consistent with it really um brought a lot of dedication out of me that I just didn't know was there anymore because after you get finished with college and you start working, you're just like, okay, I can't give myself to anything else. But then once you get started doing this and you begin to love it more and you realize it and you become passionate about it, it doesn't feel like work at all.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Double Talk Rush, and stand back with another interview. This time, I'm joined by the one and only Stephanie Hardy from the Hardy Podcast. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. And that's the Hardy Wrestling Podcast. Got to put it the wrestling in the
I
middle. That's
realised that when I said it.
HWP.
I
Yeah,
realised
it's
when I said that.
cool. It's
My
cool.
bad.
People do that all the time. It's fine.
No worries. So, the Hardy Wrestling Podcast. But
hmm
before we get into any of your work within wrestling, we need to know, Stephanie, where do you first discover wrestling as an overall fan?
Well, as an overall fan, I discovered wrestling through my father. He is a huge wrestling fan and is one still to this day. And one day he was watching it over my grandma's house. And I sort of wandered in as a 4-year-old and I just saw him watching these two men just fighting each other. And I was just like, what is this? And I asked him, I was like, Daddy, who are these people? And the people turned out to be Goldberg and I believe, and also Hulk Hogan in WCW. And basically, Dad said that I just sat, on the floor and just watched TV with him the entire time. And I just never really stopped watching wrestling since then. So I've been a fan since I was a kid,
That's
and I
really,
just never
really,
stopped.
that's really, really cool. With Goldberg Hogan being your first match when it comes to wrestling, what does that match mean to you now as you look back on it?
Well, now it's a little bit different because, of course, as a child, when you're looking at stuff for the first time and you're seeing these men fight each other, of course, you learn the lore and the legend that they carry, and what it means to the wrestling business. But now, looking at it, it's not as comfortable because um Goldberg, though he has his legend, has his moments where he might say stuff that doesn't necessarily fit the landscape of wrestling now. But it's okay because I mean he has his opinions and he has a right to them. But then you also have Hulk Hogan, who has just shown himself to be not a very nice person, not even just in terms of working with others in the wrestling business, but also with how he feels about people like me, like Black people.
Yeah.
And it is not comfortable, and it's a big disappointment in life. But it's just one of those things that you sort of have to live with, and you look back on it, you know from a childhood perspective, you're like, yeah, once upon a time this was a huge deal, but now not so much. And that's just how life is. Sometimes you live and you learn, but you just adapt.
I understand that completely. So you talked about there adapting and living and learning. When you first discovered wrestling, how do you start learning about it? Then I know you're 4 years old at the time, but is it
hmm
something that you're like, Dad, I want to watch that again? Like, is it something that becomes a regular ritual? Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it does. Like the way that certain people and certain families watch certain sports like American football or like soccer and like so many different sports. Like it became appointment watching for me and my dad. Like it was a form of bonding, and even for me and my grandma as well. Um it was a lot of it came from me watching it with them and just asking questions.
Mm.
And they would answer them, gladly, and also tell me what a lot of these adults are saying and what it actually means and how you're not supposed to repeat it, as a child. And they were very open to it. So it was sort of like a form of bonding for about a good 2 to 3 hours at a time. And anytime I had questions, I would ask. And then because, you had DVDs coming into the fold, later
Mhm.
on in life, my father was buying a lot of those because those had older matches on there that he witnessed. And so on Saturdays, we would watch those older matches, and I would ask him question upon question about who is this person? Who is this commentator? Why was this going on? and he just loved to answer the questions about it, and I would just soak it up. And that's basically how it was my wrestling fandom was built.
What was the DVD that you watched maybe the most, or the one that you had the most vivid memory of?
I would say definitely the one with, I believe, the definitive collection of the Nature Boy Ric Flair.
Mm.
Because my grandmother and my father were both huge Ric Flair fans, mostly my grandmother. And anytime, since he had been wrestling for such a long time, he has a vast catalog of matches that are just um inspirational to a degree when it comes to wrestling. So anytime you're going to watch a Ric Flair match, you're going to learn something, and you're going to learn something
Mhm.
about the opponent he was fighting and just the prestige of a lot of the titles that he held, the prestige of the Four Horsemen and what that brings. So that's something that I do recall us watching a heck of a lot, and it was really good to learn from.
What was, or what is maybe, what is or was your favorite Ric Flair match
Mm.
from that
I would
collection, maybe, or outside of it?
I would say of course, I love Ric Flair versus Shawn Michaels. Because at that point in time, you would think that Ric Flair wouldn't have such a great match with someone like Shawn Michaels at that time, but he did. And then there was a lot at stake with his career and everything. It was very dramatic. But it was really great. But then I would say any match that he would fight Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. I feel like that is one of the seminal rivalries, of the wrestling fandom as a whole from back then. So any match that he had with Ricky, I'm always looking at it because it's just fire.
That's really, really cool. What about when you move on in life and maybe step away from your family at home and things like that? How does your wrestling fandom change then?
It changed a lot, and the only way it changed because I went to college and I moved away. So to paint a picture, I live in the United States and I live in Alabama. And Alabama is in the southeastern region of the United States. So I moved up to Kentucky, which is 6.5 hours away from here, to go to college. And I didn't watch wrestling as much because I was always involved with school activities. I was in two different choirs at the time, and I was trying to like find my major. I was making all kinds of friends and stuff. So wrestling just there wasn't a lot of room for it because I was very focused on my education. But I would try my best to keep up with it online, and that was sort of like the rise of the internet wrestling community at
Mm.
that time, and also with YouTube videos and stuff. So with stuff like that being accessible to me, I was able, and also through my father texting me because it was a long distance relationship at that point between my parents and I. Um, he was always texting me what was going on. I was always looking online to see what was going on. And so I was always in the know, but then there were the small pockets of time where I wouldn't have homework, where I would find time to go to the dorm television and watch wrestling sort of as a reward for myself. So I always knew what was happening, even though I wasn't always able to watch it. And online wrestling content did help with that.
What was your biggest like reward match then maybe that you're like, oh, I saw this live during like your college gap, for lack of a better word.
That's funny. I would say one of the treats that I did get to see while I was in college was the rivalry between Stephanie McMahon and Brie Bella. And I know not a lot of people talk that much about it, but I feel like as a rivalry, with two women
Mm.
who essentially are of this powerful brand in terms of the Bellas, and then you also have Stephanie McMahon, who's just Stephanie McMahon. Um, that was such a huge deal, and then that was like the first thing I think me and my roommate shared together as someone who was learning about me as a best friend and knowing that I was a wrestling fan. So we sort of watched that together, and it was pretty insane, looking at that happen. And I would also say another big reward for myself was the cash in of Dolph Ziggler's Money in the Bank on Alberto Del Rio. That was a huge one. And that one was special because I got to watch it with my boyfriend, who is also a wrestling fan too. and he loved Dolph Ziggler at the time. So we were on the phone watching wrestling together, and then the cash in happens, and we're just all freaking out, like, oh my
Mm.
God, and he won. So those are two really big ones I remember.
Out of interest, is Dolph Ziggler the best cash-in, do you think?
I would definitely say it's up there with, like, he has one of the best cash-ins for sure, because you just didn't see it coming. And then at the time it was really hyper because he was with AJ Lee at the time, and he had Big E with him as well as his muscle. That was definitely one of the best cash-ins for sure. But I feel like the best cash-in for me would have to be Carmella's from 2018 onto Charlotte. And I love hers because she's held hers longer than anyone else.
Yeah.
And the idea that she was able to do that, like, after WrestleMania, it just really hit me. And then it was on an episode of SmackDown, which is like my favorite show ever. I was just like, oh my God, she's doing it. And
Mm.
it was just really cool. But what was so funny about it was she was trying to tell the referee, like, this is it, I'm doing this right
Oh
now.
yeah.
And he was just like, are you sure? And she was like, and she was screaming at him. And I was low key scared that it wasn't going to work. But then when it did, I was like, oh, so great. It was really cool. So that one's definitely my favorite.
That's really, really cool. You brought up there SmackDown. Why does that show speak to you so much?
I think it's because that was the first live show I ever saw as a young wrestling fan. I make the joke of saying that Birmingham, Alabama, where I'm from, is a SmackDown town because the show SmackDown has come to Birmingham more times than just about any other show. Um, and I just love it so much because there's just so many cool moments. And I also just love the color blue. So that just kind of, does it for me. And then it's just the idea of being a part of SmackDown from its very beginning, even up until now. Like, SmackDown is still a relatively young show in comparison to Raw.
Yeah.
So, being able to witness it at its very beginning, and seeing the show live and just loving the color blue and all of that and all the moments that it has had from being a taped show even to a live show now is pretty impeccable. And it's just my favorite one because it's just a really good show. It was a very wrestling heavy show at first, but then of course once they added more elements of storytelling within it, it was still relatively good. And they did it all in 2 hours, which is just great. So that is definitely my favorite. And it's just special to me because it was just the first wrestling show I ever saw.
Favorite SmackDown moment overall?
One I would say is actually two, and they involve fights that don't even happen in the ring. And they're ones that I've witnessed. It's John Cena versus Eddie Guerrero in the parking lot brawl because that
Mhm.
happened in our event center, which is called the BJCC. It's the Birmingham Jefferson Civic Center, but it's now called the Legacy Arena, and that happened in the parking lot. And I just loved being able to rewatch it on television once it was taped and they aired it, and it was just like, oh my God, there's the parking lot. And another one is when Naomi actually got to fighting with Mandy Rose in the hotel room. Because
Wow.
Mandy was trying to flirt with
Seduce Jey
Jimmy.
Uso, Jimmy Uso,
Right.
I believe.
Yeah, she was flirting with Jimmy. And it was just, and that was at a SmackDown Live, and it was here. And I was just joking, saying, "Oh my God, how is Mandy Rose at the Westin up the street about to like get with Jimmy?" But then Naomi popped up and started beating her butt in lingerie. It was hilarious to me. I loved it. I was screaming the whole time because I was rooting for Naomi the entire time. So those are really huge moments for me. And also, I would say witnessing one of the matches between Andrade and Rey Mysterio live. That's another
Ooh.
amazing moment too, because they kept fighting over different SmackDown lives, and the
Mhm.
idea that I got to see one of them was a huge blessing.
Weirdly, as an Englishman that hears Birmingham, Alabama, uh, wrestling, I associate it with injuries because I believe at one time there was a doctor that worked out of Birmingham, Alabama, that all the wrestlers went to. I believe his name is Youngblood. I believe. I could be very wrong on that. I believe
You
so.
know, it might have been, but I know during the time I was coming up as a fan, there was a guy named Dr. Andrews. And he was a very famous surgeon to athletes of all kinds, and wrestlers would definitely go to him. And as a fun fact, he worked at the hospital that I was born in.
Oh
Um,
wow.
yeah, me and my sister were both born at St. Vincent's Hospital, and that's where he would have his clinic. And he would do surgery on the wrestlers. And sometimes, if you were walk in to go to like the children's clinic, you could see inside the therapy place where they would have therapy, and you would see pictures of different wrestlers that he had done surgery on. And we saw one of Triple H. So he's retired now, but the sports medicine wing of that hospital is named after him now, and he and wrestlers still go to him and also other surgeons for their surgeries, because when Cody Rhodes had his pec injury,
Mm.
he came here, and they showed a whole clip of it on an episode of Raw, which was in Birmingham, knowing that it was going to say Birmingham on the screen and we were going to pop for it because it's us. And they showed a clip of him in the lobby of the hospital. So it's very real. It's a very real thing, and there have been some wrestlers who have come and walked around the downtown area and had good experiences because we're known for our Southern hospitality.
Mm.
So yeah, that's a very real cultural phenomenon thing that happens in wrestling here.
I believe Triple H when he had, I believe it was the quad injury during
Yes.
the what is called the Forgotten Raw match because of the
Mm-hmm.
fact that it features Chris Benoit. I believe he just said, "I'm gonna like the Best Western you were just talking about." It might have been a slightly different hotel, but I believe he literally just said, "I'm gonna get a room and I'm gonna stay here till I rehab," because that's how good the rehab and the Southern hospitality was back then, or and still is, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Like even recently, Kofi Kingston had an injury and he was coming here like to get some food after he had left the YMCA. And there was this restaurant, I believe it's called Yumify, which is sort of like a vegan restaurant. I know exactly where it is. Um, and the restaurant was about to close, but somehow or another the people who work in the restaurant decided to make his food and his order anyway. And he was just very grateful for it, and he actually talked about it on Twitter. So it was really nice to see that, and it's always really nice to hear people having good experiences here in the city. So it's still very much that cultural um just universal love that we sort of show to people who might not be from here, but they need extra help, they need a helping
Mm.
hand. We give it, and it's really nice.
What does being from Birmingham, Alabama, before we get into wrestling, some more wrestling talk in your career, what does it, you talked about the Southern hospitality and the culture, what does it mean to be there, from there to you?
Well, to me, this is a very deep question. No one's ever asked me this before in a wrestling interview. I love it. So being from Birmingham means a lot to me because it's something that I wear with pride because it's a city that's had lots of amazing growth,
Mm.
since I've, been here and moved back here from school and everything. We're always working towards and striving towards better and progress, even when others aren't doing it just yet. And that's something that I take great pride in. I take great pride in being from a city that has a very loving environment and community, even though it is a larger city because our city has 99 neighborhoods, but at the very same time
Mm.
it's a very community based place. And of course we do have our flaws, like every city does, but there's always just the act of us trying to get better and do better for others, and it's really great and it's beautiful because we have, even though there's the city and the urban part of it, there's still very much a lot of trees and nature and stuff. So it's sort of like a mixture of the two cultures of nature and also the city life as well. And the people are just amazing. You just can't
Mm.
find anything else like the people of Birmingham. And I just love being from here and just us striving for greater. And I love our history because our city is one of the main cities that helped to progress the civil rights
Yeah.
um, fight in the United States. And like when Martin Luther King wrote a letter from Birmingham jail, like that's very serious. Like they threw him in jail because he was fighting for the right things.
Yeah,
And, you know, all of that is very much a tentpole of being from here, is the history of it and how we use it to propel us forward. And I'm very proud of it. I love us and the growth that we've had over the past 10 years. And I know that it's only going to get better. I take huge and immense pride from being from here. It's really great.
that's really cool. Just one final Birmingham question before we get back onto wrestling. Most people, when they go off to college or university, as we call it in England, say,
Hmm.
I'm going to make a life where I've gone to university and things like that sometimes. Was there a desire of like, look, I really like Kentucky, but I want to go home after university?
Yeah, it was because at the time I wasn't sure what I was going to do after I had graduated from college. And I always knew I could go back home. Like that's something that my family always, you know, instilled in me. My mom was just like, look, if you need to figure it out, you can always come home.
Yeah.
Like yeah, that's what she always said to me and my sister. You can always just come home and figure it out. And then once you are ready to go out there and do it, you go out there and do it. And that is something that I'm so happy that I have had, like with the whole community thing, is my parents and my family just always being able to just ask me, okay, well, what do you want to do? What are your plans? You know, but until
Yeah.
you figure out your plans, you're going to always have a safe place to be. And coming back home, at first I felt like a failure because I was just like, oh my God, all my other friends are doing all this cool stuff and I'm
Yeah.
just back here. But at the same time, it's necessary because your journey isn't like everybody else's. And learning that as an adult, leaving your 20s and going into your 30s, you
Mm.
realize that and you make peace with the idea that your journey isn't like everyone else's, and that is perfectly fine. And I am happy that I came back home afterward because if I had not have done it, I would not have seen the city grow. I would not have, you know, done everything and been able to speak about my city with as much pride as I do if I had not have
Mm.
moved back home because I would not have known what was going on. Um, and I'm just really grateful for it. So yeah, I am glad I came back home. But if I am able and I have the opportunity to go elsewhere, then that's perfectly fine. But I'll always know that Birmingham will always be there for me, you know, if anything else crazy happens.
That's really, really cool. To be honest, that was really deep. So I really struggled to transition from deep to let's talk about people fighting. I don't know if you have like
Yes.
that podcast stuff. It's like, okay, that's really cool, but let's talk about this. So, anywho, so where is your fandom now then, Stephanie? As we record this in 2020, in August of 2024, where is your September of 2024? Where is your current wrestling fandom?
My current wrestling fandom is on fire. It's on fire. It's always been on fire, but I feel like it's growing more and more, and I love it so much. Like wrestling continues to just grow and be a place where a lot of different people can thrive. And I just love seeing that and witnessing that, even though I'm not able to watch all of the shows. Because when I started the Hardy Wrestling podcast, there was just WWE and AEW. Those were the two
Mm.
big ones right there. And of course, you do have TNA in the midst of that too. But you know, you still had like just those bigger ones. But it feels like now with Ring of Honor being a thing even more so now, and you have independent wrestling continuing to grow and flourish in different areas of the country. And then um you of course you have Wow Women of Wrestling as well.
Mm.
It just Wrestling is just a very healthy thing that different people from all walks of life are just getting into now. And the popularity is just so cool. And I feel like my adult self can live in it and my inner child can also live in it too and
Yeah,
just be like, oh my
it's
God,
very
this is so
nice, isn't
amazing.
it? And
Yeah,
not
it's
think
amazing.
like, and not have to. I feel like because, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, in terms of my fandom, and I'm talking about myself, I do apologize, but
Hmm.
I'm really curious to know what you think of this. With wrestling being cool in inverted commas, you don't have to hide your fandom as much as you used to. I know that. I know I feel that way. I don't know about you.
To a degree, I do feel that way. But what's so funny is whenever I would introduce myself to people and make friends, I wouldn't outright tell them that I was a wrestling fan, until they would be around me and I would just so happen to be watching it. And then they'd be like, "You like wrestling?" Like it would always catch my friends off
Mm.
guard. Like it wasn't something I would just lead with because, of course, I'm into so many other things as well. I feel like I'm a pretty well-rounded person. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't lead with the fact that, oh, well, I like wrestling, it would just come up later and then they would find that fascinating. But now definitely I never felt shame about it, but I definitely don't feel shame about it right now either
Shame
because
might
more
not have been the right word, but I do know what.
no,
And
like I never, was ashamed of it, and I definitely am not now because it just seems like it's way more accessible in a way, than it ever has been, and that there are people like my cousins, who will message me something that they saw in wrestling or something wrestling adjacent, like a movie
mm,
or like some music, and then they'll be like, "Oh, well, I saw this happen, Stephanie. What's going on with this?" And I'm able to tell them about it, and it's just so cool how it happens that way. I can bring in more people, with that. So I just love it so much. It's so cool.
that's really, really cool. How do you then, you talked about starting the Hardy podcast and the Hardy Wrestling podcast. I keep butchering it. I do apologize. The Hardy
It's
Wrestling
okay.
podcast and the only AEW and WWE at the time. So what year did you start it? When? What was the inspiration behind it? Everything in between.
Yeah. So I started the podcast in February of 2020. And ironically enough, I found out later that I started it on Sensational Sherry's birthday.
Oh yeah.
And she's actually from Birmingham as well. So that meant a lot finding that out later on. But yeah, like I started it in February 2020, right before the pandemic. And at the time, I was looking for a means of just sharing what I loved that I was seeing in wrestling because I was with a Facebook group of really great people who wanted to start a podcast, but somehow just never did it because, adult stuff happens, life. Yeah.
I from doing this, I have found that everyone wants to start a podcast and we'll talk about starting it. But the main
Hmm.
thing is to start, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And when I had left the Facebook group, I just needed a place to get my stuff out, but I remembered that I still had the apps and everything to record it on. So I was like, okay, well, I guess, this is the right time to do it. And it was right after the Royal Rumble that Drew McIntyre won. And then Charlotte had won too that year. So I was just like, okay, well, with all of this going on and everything that's happening afterward, you had Rhea Ripley feuding with Bianca Belair in NXT. There
Mm.
was so much happening. So I was like, okay, well, let me just do this now. So I just got on my phone and just started talking the way that I'm talking to you right now and just talking about what I liked in wrestling and just, what I had seen. And eventually it grew into these sections of a show to keep it interesting. And I started planning it out, and I was going to talk about news and gossip because in wrestling, there's so much news and gossip coming
Yeah.
out. And then to also talk about what I liked from what I saw in wrestling. And I kept putting it together slowly but surely, and it started making more sense. I started not being nervous anymore because there are certain points where you listen to episodes in the past and you can hear the hesitation
Preach.
and the fear.
Preach.
But then I've eventually got over it the more I started doing it every week because wrestling just never ends like every other sport does. It just never
Mm,
ends. So I got more comfortable with it, and then eventually I started branching out and doing interviews with people too.
mm.
And that started, I would be nervous about that as well. But once I got over the initial fear of it, and once I had planned out all of my questions and just followed that to a T, I started to feel more confident. So that's really how it got started. And I never really stopped at a certain point. Of course, whenever life stuff would happen with work, I would have to adjust, with the schedule and then have like a work-life balance as well.
Mm.
But, being consistent with it really um brought a lot of dedication out of me that I just didn't know was there anymore, because after you get, you get finished with college and you start working, you're just like, okay, I can't give myself to anything else. But then once you get started doing this and you begin to love it more and you realize it and you become passionate about it, it doesn't feel like work at all.
Mm,
So that's just what it was for me at that point and what it has been. And even moving into doing it on video now, and doing it live, I'm very comfortable with it now in a way that I knew I could do, but just didn't know I could do it about wrestling. Because I've never been camera shy. Like, I love taking pictures. I love talking, as you can see. So I was never uncomfortable with it. It was just a matter of doing it more consistently and being comfortable. So it's been great. I've been doing it for 4 years and some change, and I'm just really happy about it.
that's really, really cool. I love stories like that where people are just like, I'm gonna give it a try, and if it doesn't work, brilliant. I gave it a shot. Did you have a moment where maybe you weren't seeing the growth that you wanted? Actually, let me rephrase that question. Was
Mhm.
growth something that was important to you, or was it like, I'm just doing this because it's fun? Like you wasn't hoping to get 100K listeners or something. You didn't go into it for the listeners, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. So when I first started it, I was definitely doing it, because it made me happy and because I just love doing it. But eventually, I think maybe a year or two in, I started to focus on numbers because I was being mentored by people who
Mhm.
were sort of, encouraging me to focus on it. And and that was when I started looking at it, but I try to not have that as a main goal,
Mm.
because I find that if you get caught up in the numbers, you'll also start looking at other people who do the exact same thing that you
Yep.
do, and then you'll feel like you're doing something wrong because your numbers don't look like theirs.
Mm.
And that's something that I have always struggled with a bit, like in terms of comparing myself to others, and also, you know, um, wondering if I'm doing something wrong constantly. And I'm learning, to unlearn that part of myself and just realizing that, you know, let's collaborate more, and not be, a person that's always looking to, compete a lot of the time. And also I'm learning that your worth isn't in, the numbers you have. Your worth is in the work that you do.
Oh,
And
gotcha.
yeah, and people really do, value the work that I do. And so I find lots of validation, and it warms my heart when I hear people say, "Oh, well, I wanted to start this or try this because I saw you do it." Or I, love listening to you because I love hearing what you have to say. Like the fact that people want to listen to me really like blew my socks off at first, because I was like, I thought the only people who want to listen to me are the people who just, have relationships with me, like people who love me and stuff like that. I did not think that people would find me very fascinating in that way, to where they'd want to hear what I'd have to say. But
Mm.
I'm not going to lie to you. The first time I had a video reach over 1,000 views, I was very happy because I was talking about Mercedes Moné and her match against Kyrie at Battle in the Valley. And that was her
Oh yeah.
first match post WWE. And because I love her so much, I was like, I'm going to talk about her matches. And that's what I did. I started a series of talking about her matches that she did in New Japan and in Stardom before she went to AEW. And that was the first, video I had to crack 2,000 views. And I was like, whoa, but I kept working towards it. And, every video you have isn't going to crack 1,000, and that's okay. As long as
Yeah.
you're working towards it, the people will come eventually. So I just try to hold on to that, and just, make quality work that I know inspires me. And whoever watches it, they'll watch it, and that's cool. And if it's 100 people, then those 100 people came to watch, and that's valid. And if it's 1,000 people, that's great. And even if it's just 20 people, that's great too. So I just try to hold on to knowing that I'm doing great work that makes me happy, first of all. But if it makes other people happy, that's great too. So yeah.
That's really, really cool and a beautiful way to look at it, I think. But how do you deal with, because we all have, not, I suppose imposter syndrome would be the right word. And you talked about people maybe doing bigger numbers than you and stuff like that. how do you sort of get, I call them the gremlins, but you'll know what I mean when I finish this sentence, the gremlins out of your head and be like,
Mhm.
I've been trying to get that interview for a while. Why have they said yes to this person, maybe not to me? Why has this person got more numbers? Like, how do you get those thoughts out of your head sometimes?
Yeah, the first thing I do is maybe think that maybe we're meant to meet each other, just not in this capacity.
Mm.
I try to, think of it in that way, because sometimes I've had moments with that, and I'm just like, "Oh my God," but, I just be like, "Wait, maybe we're meant to meet each other in another capacity that isn't so official maybe," or that I try to just continue to do what I do and just believe that what's meant for me will come for me, and that's okay. Um, and then another thing that I do for the sake of my mental health and also just my spiritual health in general, I pray.
Mm.
Um, and then I also talk to a counselor and I go to therapy to get all my thoughts out. And then it's also good to just have a really good support system around you that's just going to encourage you no matter what. So that's just how I get my gremlins out of my head, because trust me, they're there, but you have to exercise them and get them away from you so you'll know that where you're supposed to be is right where you're really supposed to be. And it's okay if it's not happening right now. That doesn't mean that it's not going to happen ever. It's just not going to happen right now, and that's perfectly fine. Just shift your focus, to continue to propel yourself forward, and don't just stop at, oh, I didn't get this right here. Okay. But what else you gonna do in the meantime though? You gotta keep working. So yeah.
No, I understand your point. You talked about there as well, got to keep working. How do you deal
Hmm.
with burnout as a content creator and days that you think so much wrestling, watch so much, need to like record episode but too tired? How do you deal with that sort of burnout as a content creator?
Well, when it comes to that type of burnout, I know I'm gonna always watch wrestling because I always enjoy it. Even outside of content creation, I'm always gonna watch it and I'm always gonna love it. But
Mm.
there are some times where you do just have to take a day and just take a nap. Or go to sleep early, because you have stuff you got to do the next day, like go to work, like if you have a full-time job. um and then you also have to feed into the relationships, that you have in your life. But then you also have to make room for your other interests as well. Like, I'll do stuff by myself, like go to the park or go for a walk, or I'll go eat at a place that interests me, or I'll go to a concert because I love music. Like, I feed my other interests, and that actually fuels me more creatively to come back to the
Mhm.
wrestling when it's time for it. And I just love, spending time with myself, spending time with my best friends. I have a great group of best friends from college, spending time with them, talking to them, checking up on them, and hearing what they think about life. And then I have a boyfriend as well, and spending time with him, so I just try to keep my life as well rounded as possible and open to all my other interests. So when I do come back to wrestling, I am very much fueled creatively and fueled in other parts of my life where I don't feel like I'm just in this wrestling hole, because
Yeah.
that could get really unhealthy.
Mm.
So once you feed the other parts of your life in a healthy way, it still feeds into the wrestling, just not in the way that you just dedicate wrestling, wrestling, wrestling too. So that's just what I try to do.
That's really, really cool. You talked about concerts there. Best concert you've been to in a while.
When I saw Janelle Monae last year,
Ooh.
that that was one of the best concerts I had seen in a while. Like, we were all just together dancing, and they are just a beautiful person, and just getting to see them in concert was a dream for me, because I remember discovering them on MySpace and just loving their music and just embracing the different types of things that they were doing. So getting to see them was just really great. And then on top of that, there was a part where the band was inviting people to dance on the stage, and I got to dance up on the stage. But what's so funny is I had on a Bianca Belair wrestling t-shirt, and Janelle saw it and complimented me on it. So that was like the best thing. I was just so happy. So yeah, like that concert was really amazing. So that's really like the last big one I went to. So I want to see Stevie Wonder later on in October, but
Mm.
I'm just trying to, work it out schedule wise and see how I can make it happen. But yeah, like I try to go to as many concerts as I can because I love music and I just love performances. So I just try my best to, do as much as I can. So yeah.
That's really, really cool. Talked about there feeding your outside interests and stuff like that. But what is the wrestling show that you're like currently as we record this in September of 2024? I keep doing that. I don't know why. But in September of 2024, what is the wrestling show that you're like, this is fun for me. Even if I didn't have my podcast and I was talking about it, I'd still be watching it.
That's definitely Wow Women of Wrestling. Um, because I've always been passionate about women in wrestling doing more and doing just as much, if not more, than the men do. So the idea that a show like this exists again in its iteration, and it's growing more and more each time, and it's an hour dedicated to women's wrestling, I would definitely be watching that if I wasn't making content about it because it's women in an hour-long show. That is just incredible. Like I am just a sucker for stuff like that. So even if I wasn't making content about them, which I am, I would definitely be watching that. Like, and it's definitely different from WWE and AEW and TNA, but at the same time, it's still very beautiful in the way that it showcases its women. So I would be watching that every weekend if there was no podcast and if there was no writing. That is my thing. I love it.
That's really, really cool. So we've talked a lot about the podcast and stuff. How did the other two sides of your wrestling media career come about? How does Fansided come about? And how does some wrestling commentary work come about as well?
Yeah, so commentary came about when I would watch my friend Rob Williams out of New Jersey do commentary. And I was just like, oh, so can podcasters do commentary? He was one of the main people who was helping me in the beginning of my journey. So in my podcast journey, but then I also saw he was doing commentary. So I was just like, I don't know, maybe one day I could try that. And when I had booked my first show, which was an all women show, which is the Belladonna division,
Mm.
which was an offset of Spartan Wrestling in Gadsden, Alabama, which is about an hour away from Birmingham. Um, I was just so surprised to have booked that show because I was still a baby in podcasting at the time. Like I had done it for a year, and the promoter was looking for somebody in, well, not just in Alabama, but just in the country in general, who would be available to do commentary. And my friend Miranda, who's from Arizona, saw that post and said, I told him about you, talk. And I would talk to her and I was just like, okay. So I talked to her and I wasn't sure because here again, I'm still a baby, still trying to figure everything out. And I sent Casey a clip of my podcast and she listened to, I believe, maybe 30 seconds of the beginning of my show and wanted me immediately. And I was like, what?
That's really cool.
Are you sure? Like, I was just really scared. But I just tried to take what I learned from commentary, from watching it on TV so much and just finding my own voice through it. And I just practiced and practiced and practiced because I didn't want to sound like a dummy.
Mm.
Um, and I just practiced as the weeks were ahead. I collected information on a lot of the wrestlers. And then, of course, that changes with scheduling and stuff. And I just did the best I could do. And, they brought me back for like two other shows and it wound up working out. And then that led me to getting called up to Brooklyn for Black Girl Magic, which was a show in Brooklyn that they had that features all Black women on a show. And I was
Mm.
so proud to have done that, and that came from me going to New York to see a Battle Club show and also to participate in Black Wrestle Fest, which was the first wrestling convention of its kind to feature, mostly Black and African American people. And that was
Mm.
just amazing to be a part of. And that was my first time in New York. So getting to see them, be around them, um, was amazing. And they asked me, do you want to do this show? And I was like, of course I want to do this show. And I came back 2 months later to commentate for the show with Faye Jackson, who was just a veteran
Ooh.
in independent wrestling. And just getting to be on there with her, it just meant the world to me. So that's just how all of that with Battle Club Pro and Black Girl Magic has started to get going. And um, I do enjoy doing it a whole lot, but I feel like I'm accepting the fact that in this season it's not happening for me, and it's okay because I have other things I can focus on with my podcast growing the way that it is and with my writing career growing the way
Yeah.
that it is. I'm okay with it now because, people still find my work and resonate with it. So I find that as long as I'm still active in some ways, then I'll be fine. But if commentary does come back, then I am okay with it. So I just try to make as much room for everything as I possibly can and not be discouraged by the idea that I might not be booked in one area because I know I'm
Mhm.
still blessed in another area, and that's okay. So I'm just still, finding my way through it. And I just feel really lucky and just really blessed that people value my voice in that way in different aspects. So I'm still navigating it, but I feel like I'm navigating it better and better each year. So yeah.
That's really, really cool. You talked about navigating each year there. What would you say to 2020 Stephanie, who started her podcast and things like that, was maybe a bit nervous? If you could have a conversation with her, what would you say to her? And then what do you think she would say to you?
Mm, that's another deep question. I
We go a
think
bit deep on this show. I do
we
apologize.
did. No, no, it's fine. I like deep conversations like this. It's cool. I would tell 2020 Stephanie that if you feel nervous doing this now, it's okay. But just know that the journey it's going to take you on, it's going to be fast, but it's going to be worth it in the end because you're going to feel happy from it and you're going to feel joy from it. I would tell her that. And I feel like she would look at me and be like, well, how fast is this going to go? Because we're doing this in our room in our parents' house.
Mm.
What is going to happen from this? Like how is this going to work? And I would just tell her, you know, trust me, it's gonna work. And once you go on the journey and once you get to where I'm at, you're gonna be happy. You're gonna cry sometimes. Happy cry, sad cry, whatever. But it's gonna be worth it. And it's gonna make you wonder why, you never really thought about it as a possibility years ago. But once you are in it, it's definitely okay. So yeah, I would just hold her hand and just give her a hug and just say, look, it's going to be okay. And you're going to adapt as well as you can through all of it. And it's going to be worth it. And you're going to be happy from within and not just from the outside. And it's going to be great.
That's a beautiful way to end this, I think. But before we do my traditional wrap-up question, Stephanie, I have two questions for you. If you did step away from wrestling media tomorrow and felt like, okay, I've achieved what I wanted to do, would you view your career as a success? And would you want your legacy to be?
I would view it as a success, because there are people who work in wrestling media who have done journalism professionally for years and have actually made it their life's work from a professional standpoint. And so, getting to work with them and having people like that respect me and the work that I do and actually want to help me, to get better at it, that's something that I find great success in. And I also find great success in knowing that this is something that really makes me happy from within, like I said. And if I were to wrap it up and if I were to end it, there's still the part of me that would be at a show, still watching wrestling and still being true to that part of myself and still loving it, but not being in it. And that would be okay. Um, and that is, my definition of success. It's just being okay and being happy, whether you're doing it for yourself or whether you're doing it for money or whatever. Like as long as you're happy from within, then that's all that matters. So if I didn't do it anymore, I'd be like, yeah, I did that. Like I tried that, and that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, because some people, just stay in one thing and then they just stay focused on it. I can say that in my young life, I'm just 31, that I've tried multiple things and it's been great. And even just doing this in wrestling, it's just like, yo, like this is great. So I would be very happy about it. I really would. I would be very satisfied.
What do you think your legacy is in this space?
Yeah, that was the other question. Yeah. I think my legacy is to be a light where there seems to be a lot of anger and darkness.
Mm,
Um, and I've been told that there are some, I've been told by certain people that whenever they see me post something, they feel like it's a bit of a relief, in the midst of so much discourse about things that might be negative or something.
mm,
And I feel that my legacy in wrestling media will be um, that I told stories, that I talked to wrestlers and made them feel comfortable in their humanness. And that, I made friends and didn't try to step on anyone to get success, that I tried to lift people up as much as I could. And that I will just be a light. I just hope that that's really what I give to it. It's just positivity, light, and just being a person that uplifts others.
that's really, really cool. And again, a beautiful way to end this, I think. But before we do, Stephanie, we're going to do a segment that is a tradition on this channel called Generic Wrestling Questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before will know, so I'll ask Stephanie her favorite match, favorite pay-per-view card, such as Double or Nothing 2019. For example, favorite wrestler's entrance team, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler. Basically, the questions I assume Stephanie might be asked, on social media, at wrestling shows, or even in Spotify comments on her podcast. So now she'll have a place to be like, guys, I have answered this. Please go watch this. So, what's your favorite match of all time?
Okay, my favorite match of all time is Mercedes Moné slash Sasha Banks versus Bailey at NXT Takeover Brooklyn. That is, of course, the greatest women's match of all time. And just watching it really just fully reintroduced me back into a level of wrestling that I wasn't able to consume. Because here again, it was my senior year of college, trying to graduate. But when I saw that match, I was just like, oh my God, women's wrestling.
Mm.
Yes. So that's my favorite match of all time.
What about your favorite pay-per-view card overall, such as Double or Nothing 2019?
I would say my favorite pay-per-view card, I would say right now I would say it's WrestleMania 39. And I know it's really recent and but at the same time I was
40
happy
comes
to
up a lot at the moment, so
yeah, it's
you're right.
recent, but I was present for it, and just being in the midst of the weekend's music playing all the time that whole weekend, and seeing the card, and everything, seeing John Cena fight Austin Theory, and seeing the first of, I guess, many matches we might get with Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns, and just all the emotion that came from that, and witnessing Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte Flair and a great match that they had, and seeing Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn beat the Usos, seeing all of that just collectively as a whole was just like life changing for me, and it never ends in my mind. So that's my favorite pay-per-view card right now.
That's really, really cool. What about your favorite wrestler's entrance theme?
Oh my God, that's so crazy. I think I'm gonna do one from the past and one from the present. One that I really love is Rey Mysterio's old song, where he had this rapper named Chris Classic saying, "Who's that jumping out the sky? REY
Mm.
Mysterio." That's my favorite one, and it makes me want to run through a brick wall. Um, and Bianca Belair's theme song. I find that if you play that while walking or running or exercising, it hypes you up, and
Yep.
it makes you feel like you're like super important, like you're really like bouncing on everybody's, obstacles and stuff like that. And that just really like it just makes me happy, and it makes me feel encouraged. So those two are my favorite interest themes.
What about your favorite tag team?
Ooh. I would say my favorite tag team. Mm, I think male wise, my favorite tag team is the Street Profits, Montez Ford and Angelo Dawkins, because they're always going to give you a good match. Like they are just always going to give you a good match, and I love how Angelo has become more and more agile in their time together as a group, because of course Montez is the agile one because he's smaller in stature in comparison, but watching Angelo grow has been really cool. And I would also say the New Day and all of their iterations of tag teams, because they're royalty. Um, and I just love them so much just for everything that they've done for wrestling as a whole. So those are my favorite tag teams.
That's really, really cool. You mentioned male wise there though. Who's your favorite female tag team?
I think my favorite female tag team would probably have to be from WoW, and they're the Mighty Mites, and their names are Sugar and Spice, but they're amazing wrestlers. They sort of have a hybrid of mat work and also lucha background as well. They are really amazing as a tag team, and they're still relatively new because they only just premiered last season on WoW. But I really love everything they do and how they work together as a team. Those are my favorite female tag teams right now. Is the Mighty Mites from WoW.
That's really, really cool. Then finally, Stephanie, the biggest generic question in my opinion. Who is your favorite overall wrestler?
My favorite overall wrestler is Mercedes Moné. To me, she is the greatest women's wrestler of all time, simply because she adapts really well to whoever she's wrestling. And I can say this from watching her in WWE and then even seeing how she adapted to the New Japan style when a lot of people doubted that she would be able to. She adapted incredibly well to it, and just seeing her have classics with people like Kairi, like Mayu Iwatani, and then seeing her move over to AEW and still doing that just further proves why she calls herself the greatest of all time. But it's not just, something that she does to big herself up. It's an actual fact. Like everyone she has wrestled, just about any person she has wrestled that has met her where she is, has a classic with her.
Mhm.
And we can argue about it, of course, because people have their differing opinions, and I will hear them out. I will hear them out because I'm very diplomatic in that way. But for me, it's Mercedes. It's always her. It's her. It's always Mercedes. She's the CEO and she's the greatest to me for a reason.
You brought up CEO there just quickly. Thoughts on the CEO chant?
I love it. I love it. Even though a lot of people kind of come down on it because it's piped in, I feel like it's still a way to get fans involved in the chanting,
Hmm?
because I love crowd interactions. Like
Not
I've
all
always been
chant, not all chanting is organic. I think that's what people have to remember. Some of it's
right.
manufactured. Like if Will
Exactly.
Ospreay, sorry, but if Will Ospreay can get away with it in his theme, I think Mercedes can as well. If you know what I mean.
Exactly. Yes. Like that's just how I feel. And if you chant CEO, it's right there, and I think it's really fun. And it just feeds into who she is now, and the persona that she has. And I know a lot of people say they might not understand it and how it's just an offshoot of the boss character. But here's the thing, when you're a CEO and you're not just wrestling, you're also being an actress, you're also like the founder of a CBD company with another person, and you have all types of other endeavors that you've got going on. Essentially, you are a CEO, and that's where that
Mm.
comes from. Like if you follow her career outside of wrestling, you know that it's not just a character, it's who she actually is. So with her and all of her endeavors, she is the CEO, and it does make sense. So yeah. And I'm not just
Uh,
saying that because I'm a fan of hers. I'm saying it because it's true.
no,
So that's just,
I've
it's
never
based
thought
in
of it that
fact.
way, but that's really cool
Yeah.
actually. But as we
Yeah.
wrap this up, Stephanie, obviously I want to say thank you for a great conversation. But the question I end this show on is I believe as YouTubers, podcasters like yourself, or even just people with social media, we're all sort of gonna live forever in a very, very weird way, if you think about the word. So what is one piece of content you're like, please remember me for that? And then what is one that you're like, nope, please don't remember me for that?
Wow. I would say, please remember me for my Black History Month content,
Hmm?
because I love speaking with other content creators of color like me, about, where wrestling is in terms of African and African American people. So I would say definitely remember me for that. Like I have collaborations with the Jobber Tears podcast and with Black Wrestling and other shows as well. So please remember me for those, because those are very important conversations that needed to be had, and that I'm willing to have again, if it comes down to it, if the opportunity presents itself. And I feel like I actually don't have any shame about any of my shows. So you could definitely remember me for all of my content. Like now, I would say maybe my earlier episodes, but at the same time, I would say, remember me for those too, because you can remember me from where I started and look at where I am now. So remember me for all of it.
That's a
Remember
beautiful way. That's a beautiful way to end
it.
this, I think, Stephanie. But before we do, please promote yourself. Where can the good people find you, your work, etc.?
Thank you so much for having me. And of course, you guys can follow me, your girl Stephanie Hardy, on Instagram and on X/Twitter at Queen Steph Hardy. You can also follow the Hardy Wrestling Podcast on Instagram at Hardy Wrestling Podcast and on X/Twitter at Hardy Wrestle Pod. It's short because of the characters. It's okay. Um, and you can listen to the Hardy Wrestling Podcast everywhere you get your audio shows. That's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and I believe Amazon as well. That's an option. And you can also watch the show on my YouTube channel and subscribe. And of course, ring the bell so you get notified wherever there's new content. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can see all of my stuff there. I also have HWP Extra, where I talk about specific matches and also specific moments in wrestling. You can catch that. And my also prediction shows that I do for pay-per-views from time to time. And you can watch my show that I do with Katrina Blake of In Cat We Trust, where we talk about WoW, which is our WoW post show, which is Steph and Cat Talk WoW. And of course, you can read my articles on dailyddt.com, which is an offshoot of Fansided. Read all my articles there and just be on the lookout for any new stuff that I might have going on. And just follow me on social media because I might be anywhere at any point in time, and I might post about it. So you just gotta watch out because I might be in your city. You just never know. So that's where you can find me and follow me and watch all of my content and stuff.
It's well worth doing, guys. One of the hardest working people in this space, but one of the nicest as well. So if you guys like this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter or at Tom Talks Rubbish, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye now.
Thanks for watching this Tom Talks Rubbish conversation. Before you go, please make sure you leave a like on the video, share it around, and subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish on YouTube, as well as follow Tom Talks Rubbish on Twitter/X.